Continuing with our reading of Dallas Pimiento Book 1, Bronco, starting with a piece called All Joking Aside. Apparently, he has not only lost contact with the hidden world, but forgotten everything he ever knew about it, Breakwood reported to his associates. What about this Dr. Tennis? One of the other cloaked men asked. The light overhead was concentrated directly over their heads as they sat around the circular table, giving them a creepy, formidable appearance, which is exactly as they wanted to appear. Breakwood conjured a small, semi-transparent figure beside him on the tabletop. "This is the man," he said. "You understand we have only anecdotal evidence that he escaped the collapse." One man, who had not spoken thus far in the meeting, interrupted. "Find him," he ordered. Under a lone and massive oak standing in the middle of a sunny pasture sat a man and a woman. "I'll fight that bull for you if you want," said the man named Todd. He was referring to an animal that could be seen on the other side of a fence separating the field in which they sat from the next. "That's not necessary, Abelia," the woman smirked. Hammer-gatherer indulges in potatoes. "I have aimed at simplicity and found that people are insulted. More than that, they are offended at my steps towards a mastery of patience. I got a little grease on my drawing board, but that's okay, even though I'm sick of that word. It's not quite as annoying as cool, but still. The smell of oyster stew is in the air. It symbolizes something to me, some kind of Alice in Wonderland connection or synchronicity. I wonder if Disney could sue me if I made a movie called Cinderella. I ought to make one called Disneyana. How would you go about making such a movie? Hell, any movie at all, this guy named Helmholtz wants to know. Fuck Disney, I declare. I will bang my aging fist on the table and thrash about in my seat, deep in the rough sea of my depression. Helmholtz lives in the tower in the woods, not your suffocating pine forest full of briars and rusted-through tricycles, but real woods, i.e. a planned estate full of calculated oaks and deliberate maples, the underbrush all placed there by design. Everything is so crappy that I have to look at and deal with. I wish I could live in a tower. I wish many things. Oh, what's the point in detailing my dissatisfaction? I have tried to get this novel, off the ground, but I'm so bored and have only the vaguest idea of what I want to do here. My last 6 books were all collections of one-page stories. I wanted to do something bigger and better than that, but it seems I'll have to go back to that if I want to continue. But who knows? Maybe I don't want to. My life is so backwards. I checked out a book from the library this weekend that has all these modern cartoonists in it talking about what they do and why. One of them, Gary Panter, who isn't all that great if you ask me, and who actually would tell me that, teaches art apparently. Not only does he get paid for his work, but he teaches. I never received any training in anything. I have to work at the bug-fuck racist shithole United States Postal Service and squeeze in my totally untutored primitive cartoons and writing on my lunches and breaks, and nobody gives a damn. Submit something for publication, you suggest? Ha! That will never work, because I suck. No one will ever give me a living in exchange for my stuff. Dallas Pimiento tore down the poster from the Pepsi machine. How were the delicious Pepsi products inside the machine to be properly marketed if the front of the machine was partially obscured by a poster? Part 2. Beautiful skin. Dallas Pimiento examined the backs of his hands. He had beautiful skin. He knew it and was proud of it. His hands were especially beautiful. They were the hands of an artist. He didn't understand other people's aesthetic likes and dislikes. At one time, there had been a vogue for women's hands to be small, slim, and pale, with each finger tapering to a point. Pimiento preferred women's hands to be like his own, long, thin fingers and wide palms, veiny and strong. He didn't understand women whose preference was for hairy men with blunt grippers for hands. Pimiento was driving home from the grocery store as he contemplated his hands on the steering wheel. He had seen a fat couple, a man and a woman, at the store, and felt such contempt for them. He wondered if they understood just how revolting they were. No, it was impossible. In addition to being fat and ugly, they were patently stupid. They had been dithering over the various brands of margarine when Pimiento came upon them. As Pimiento selected a quart of fat-free milk, his wife's orders, not his. If it were up to him, his household would do without milk altogether. He glanced back at the couple and wondered how their sexual intercourse was accomplished. In total ignorance, he decided. One inkling of insight on either side, but especially on the man's, and the act could not go forward. Their skin was the color of white cheese, their hair fair and lank. The man's head was going bald, something he had tried to remedy, or was it just his sense of style, by keeping it in a crew cut and wearing a handlebar mustache? Dallas Pimento's skin was olive, and although he no longer tanned, fearing cancer, would turn a delicious tone if he did. Further contrasts suggested themselves to Pimiento, even as he began to remonstrate with himself for being so hateful. He was dressed in black loafers, chinos, and a light blue Oxford shirt tucked in. The other man wore flip-flops, jeans cut off just at the knee, and a faded T-shirt that had at one time sported a transfer that read Swamp Dweller. His mate was dressed the same, except that her jeans dragged on the floor, and her T-shirt bore an image of a beribboned teddy bear. Now, on the way home, looking at his hands on the steering wheel and getting a feeling of confidence from their pleasing appearance, Pimiento glanced at his eyes in the rearview mirror. They were surrounded by wrinkles. He was looking increasingly like some of his more unappealing relatives. At least he didn't dress or act like them. A compelling 13. The phone rang with 13 staccato peals of its old-fashioned bell. This indicated to Dallas Pimiento that someone at LPM, the Loath Procurement Ministry, the secret organization that he secretly worked for, was trying to contact him. He answered using his code name. "Bronco here," he said in resonant and manly tones. "Skip flag, Bronco. Can you be here in 20 minutes?" said a snappy nasal voice. "I'll try." Pimiento rolled his eyes towards the back of the house where he knew his wife was. She wouldn't like him going out, especially if she suspected that it was to the regional LPM headquarters. After he hung up, Pimiento decided to just tell her the truth and hope for the best. If she raised a big enough fuss, he would consider himself released from his obligation to go. Of course, some sort of signal to headquarters would be necessary, telling the executives there of his inability to obey the summons. Perhaps a rocket, but that was all conjectural. First, he must tell the wife. A chicken struts through. In the midst of our chaotic narrative, a chicken struts through. He is not and was not an ordinary bird, crossing the road for philosophically indeterminable reasons. He was a poster board creature, three-toed and funky, dressed in his purple corduroy jacket and brown gabardine slacks. "May I see the menu, please?" he asked Dallas Pimiento with an eyebrow cocked crazily over his left eye. The right-hand one remained down. For all his jauntiness, he yet kept something in reserve. Perhaps it was the plot. Pimiento hesitated only a moment before pulling a folded piece of vinyl from a pigeonhole in his desk. "Here you are," he said, smiling for the first time in days. The chicken's beak moved up and down as he deliberated. "Something simple?" Pimiento suggested. "Yes," the chicken decided, slapping the menu together and handing it back to Pimiento. "Something simple, like back on the farm. And yet," Pimiento drummed his long fingers across his face, "not bland." "Oh no, never bland," the chicken hastened to concur. "If you will follow me, I will show you to a table." Pimiento came out from behind the podium and started to thread his way through the throng of animatronic diners. "I notice you don't address me as Sir," the chicken said to him as he followed. "I never call anyone Sir," Pimiento explained over his shoulder. "It's a medieval word with no place in our society today." "It's a sign of respect," the chicken told Pimiento as the latter pulled out a chair for him. "First, respect is earned, not offered like a sacrifice to an idol. Second, I show my respect in other ways, such as not cooking you," Pimiento wanted to say, but as a vegetarian he could not make such a joke with a stranger. As the organ music swelled up and the horns cut in, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a cinnamon honey bun still in its wrapper. He placed it with great ceremony before the chicken. Watching a cricket match. Dallas Pimento's new acquaintance, Rectus Aimwell, took him to a cricket match. "That's the bowler there," Aimwell discreetly pointed at the man holding the ball. "Ah," Pimiento confirmed his understanding with a nod. The two sat in silence for some minutes as play continued. "I heard you were put through the ringer the other night," Aimwell said softly. "Yeah," Pimiento replied. He sighed. "I don't know how much more I can take." I recently took a new job, Amwell told him. I don't think a new job is the answer. For me it was, Amwell applauded along with those around them at an apparently well-performed set of actions. Pimiento mimed clapping his hands. If you like, continued Amwell, I can arrange a meeting between you and my employer. Pimiento glanced at Amwell. What do you do? I manipulate corn smut prices, Amwell answered. Corn smut prices, Pimiento repeated. Amwell laughed. Oh, it's not as complicated as it sounds, he said. Complicated was not the word Dallas Pimiento had been thinking of. Amwell continued, and I don't actually have to handle any corn smut, he paused. You do know what corn smut is. It's a fungal growth on ears of corn. Considered a blight by most corn farmers, it is not only edible, but something of a delicacy to some people. Pimiento revealed the breadth of his knowledge. It was not for nothing that those who knew him thought of him as an exemplary specimen of wasted potential. You surprise me, Amwell smiled. Yes. And through various avenues of influence I can affect the market price of corn smut. And this is somehow advantageous to your employer? Pimiento asked. Yes, you see, Amwell began. Someone on the pitch shouted, Look out! Just before the hard cricket ball struck Amwell in the head. Dallas Pimiento took control of the situation, ordering people about and looking after the wounded man, all the while wondering what Amwell's employer's name was. Carl Nielsen. Do you like Carl Nielsen? Dallas Pimiento asked Skip Flagg, his liaison at the LPM. The guy from Cheap Trick? Skip idly replied as he thumbed through an LPM publication called Biff d'Orizant. No, that's Rick Nielsen. Pimiento sat in the chair by Skip's desk in the small office Skip shared with two other ministry men. Ozzy's son, the country rock guy? Skip, are you trying to be obtuse? Pimiento asked. The phone on Skip's desk rang. Yes, Skip said into the mouthpiece. He's right here. He looked at Pimiento. We've been talking about music. After a pause, he said, I'll tell him. He hung up saying, Thorpe's ready for you. Pimiento got to his feet. Rick Nelson is Ozzy and Harriet's kid. Carl Nielsen is a Swedish composer. I thought you might have heard of him, he said. Is he good? Skip asked. Yes. You should check him out. You like Mahler, right? Yeah. Pimiento walked towards the door. Dallas, Skip called to him. Pimiento looked back. Have you ever thought how real life is a lot more like L'Avventura than some novel? Skip asked. You mean full of incidents and conversations that don't have any significance? Pimiento smiled. Yeah, Skip nodded. Or that don't move the plot of our lives towards some great resolution? He looked through the window on the far side of the room at the fake cityscape outside. Well, don't get maudlin. Skip returned to his perusal of Biff d'Orizant. Sorry, Skip, but when you've got Nielsen's second running through your brain, you tend to take everything so dramatically. Guided by voices. Mr. Thorpe, the chief of private dissemination for the Loath Procurement Ministry, sat behind the heavy desk in his book-lined office. On the other side of the desk, sitting in one of the two chairs there, was an elderly man named Gravel. You say this man's name is Dallas Pimiento? The old man asked as he took out an index card and a pen from his pocket. That's right, spelled just as it sounds, said Thorpe. Gravel eyed the name after he had written it down. Good man? He asked, looking up. He pocketed the card. Mr. Thorpe studied the leather surface of his desktop. In many ways, this department could not exist without him, he said. What is his point of focus? Gravel asked. He is a painter. Of any repute? Oh, Lord, no, Thorpe chuckled. He wouldn't be any use if he was famous. Besides which, his work is outside the mainstream of the normally accepted or acceptable. Is it his subject matter? That is so outré? No, his subject matter is actually quite boring. Men and women in rather conservative attire standing about as if at a party for the somnolescent. Thorpe paused as he put his hands together, kneading his joints. No, it is more question of his execution. His technique? Yes, as you say, his technique. At that moment came the knock on the office door that could only be Dallas Pimiento. Thorpe pushed the button on his desk that allowed the door to be opened. The man Thorpe and Gravel saw enter was about an inch over 6 feet tall, a man who bore on his face signs of the painful effort it took him to keep his weight in check. Gravel was agog at the size of Pimento's ears and nose. As Pimiento took the seat beside Gravel at Thorpe's invitation, little did the elderly man suspect that Pimiento was thinking about alien lanes. But Thorpe knew, even if he didn't know the specifics, that Pimiento was always thinking something. hidden electrical socket. After Earl Bodrum had taken possession of the mechanical sheep, he discovered an electrical socket hidden inside the creature's anus. "I might have been killed," he joked with his tiny wife Thelma, "if I wasn't a man of deep moral convictions." "What do you mean, Earl?" Thelma looked up from the bowl of peas she was shelling. "Skip it," Bodrum asked the little lady. He stood in the back door of the kitchen looking out the screen door at the distant barn where his new purchase was housed. "What do you think that socket is for?" Thelma asked. "Catching hippies, I guess," Bodrum mused. "What do you mean, Earl?" "Aw, skip it, Thelma, skip it." "No," Bodrum began, turning away from the door. "It's probably just a convenient place to have an outlet. It's protected from the rain anyway," he chuckled. "Do you mean that sheep can generate power?" Thelma asked. She had a grocery sack full of unshelled pea pods on the floor beside her chair on her left side, the bowl in her lap, and another grocery sack on her right where she dropped the empty shells. "No, not generate it, but since it runs on electricity, you can draw off a little of it if you happen to need it," Bodrum told her. "But Earl, what's that sheep for?" Thelma demanded. "Well, it's a novelty, isn't it? People pay $1 each to see that thing walk around." "Is that what it was made for?" "No, I think it was made for keeping the grass cut." "You mean it eats grass? How else do you think it gets the power to run? I thought you said it was electric." "Yeah, it is. It converts grass into power." "Earl," asked Thelma, "how does it pass its waste?" Bodrum looked at her with his mouth agape. She had stumped him. Mountain of Power. The time for Ruth's daily wheeling about the warehouse was long past. No one had come to see her. No one had come to see about her. She had known for a couple of days now that her legs were close to being fully regenerated. She hadn't told either of the two assistants who she usually saw because she wanted to wait until she saw Dr. Dimum again. She wondered if he already knew and if this was why everyone was late. As the time for the TV news approached, she turned it off and sat in silence for a few minutes. Curious, she scrabbled around until she could look out the window in the door of the little trailer. Her legs were still tethered by hoses and wires to the expensive-looking machinery that was helping her get better. It was difficult to position herself so that she could see across the expanse of concrete floor. In her efforts, she somehow got tangled up and fell heavily against the door. It opened, and Ruth fell partially out. She tried to haul herself back up and inside, but she slowly fell farther and farther, until just before she landed on the concrete, she lashed out with her new legs and found herself standing upright. The sensation of standing up unaided after so many months made her want to go to the toilet, but mixed in with that feeling was one of triumph and relief. A step or two convinced her that she could walk again, however shakily. She mounted the steps back into the trailer and made use of its facilities. Then, with no one around to help her or give her instructions, Ruth exited the trailer once again. She walked about delightedly, even breaking into a short jog. She was unused to exertion and soon became winded. Still, it felt good. She looked anxiously about, hoping that Dr. Dimum would appear. It was now over an hour since she had discovered her legs worked. What should she do? She headed for the door across the long stretch of concrete. "I could walk to the top of Stone Mountain," she thought idly, smiling at the thought. When she found the door locked, she had only a moment of doubt concerning what to do. She kicked out with the bottom of her foot. Though shod in nothing more than flimsy slippers, she felt no pain as she easily broke the lock. Pelican returns to base. The Zatoga transport, nicknamed the Pelican by irreverent grunts among the task force, landed somewhat abruptly and with far less aplomb than its designer and manufacturer had projected. "User error," a spokesman at Voice Motors would probably say if any complaints were made. The transport's cavernous beak opened, revealing 9 men standing within. Drew Mangrove, the pilot and first to descend from the beak, pulled his helmet off, swearing vigorously. He scanned the makeshift landing bay. "Where's Gooberson?" he bellowed. In response, a hulking man in coveralls with a dirty red rag about his neck emerged from beneath the upraised hood of an ancient truck. "You want me?" he asked in his harsh, deep voice. As the rest of the Pelican's crew clambered out of the beak, Mangrove began to make his dissatisfaction with the vehicle and the servicing it had received known to Gooberson. "Calm down," the big man insisted. "This thing is a piece of shit," Mangrove ended his tirade just as he ran out of breath. "I never said it wasn't." Gooberson had by now walked over to the upset pilot. "It was Rackham that made us take it." "That'll do, Vic," came a voice from behind him. It was Rackham himself, the task force director. "Speak of the devil," Gooberson said as he turned and looked down at the little man with the sharp features. "What did you see, Drew?" The director addressed himself to the pilot. Damn little, came the reply. Explain. In between trying to keep from flying out of the sky and overcompensating for the lack of ergonomic ratios, I had little time to make any observations. I told you that bird's a death trap, Gooberson added. The Sedoga transport is a highly advanced piece of machinery, Rackham lectured them. Our department didn't spend millions of dollars on it for us not to use it, and use it we shall. We'll stop there and continue next time. Thank you very much for listening, if you have.